I am going to interview my amazing father, Command Sergeant Major Ray Love. And the reason I want to interview him is because he has an amazing life story to tell. He's a veteran of both the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and so many stories of different things he's done throughout his career in the military and afterwards. And he's made such an impact on my life and my brother and sister's lives. And I just feel that he has so much wisdom and amazing stories to tell that I really want to share him with the world because I adore this man. So I'll try to get this started without crying.
Yeah, say, you're going to make me cry. I'm supposed to be tough and ornery,
and you need to be, right?
and be that kind of a tough guy, and I'm a wimp at it, basically.
So,
Okay.
Dad, let's start from the beginning, right?
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about, where you were born, and, a little bit about that.
Well, I was born in Pennsylvania, outside Harrisburg, a small town. I can't recall the name offhand. But anyways, that was in September 19th, 1931. And my mother, I never met my father. He was there, but I was only like 2 years old when we moved to Detroit. And so I don't have any recollections of service or life in Pennsylvania. And then when we got to the small town of Ecorse in Downriver District of Detroit, that's when, I started remembering things and started doing things and went to school, like everybody else when you, for kindergarten, and went to school. And I was not a very good academic student, and later on as I, went through high school, or not high, I call it high school because the facility was junior high, high school, all in one. And so the building was a high school, school number one, and no names then. And so.
Wait, so the school didn't even have a name? It was just school number one?
Yeah, school number one.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And school number two, school number three, then we moved to my mother. It was during the Depression, towards the end of the Depression, and we didn't know it at the time, but we learned as we started meeting people and traveling around the city, doing things, we realized how poor we were. And but we weren't the only ones. Everybody there that we knew was in the same category, and we were all trying to, make some money and everything else. And that was the realization that, we were poor, but yet we got along great. And every community that where Ecorse was, every surrounding community of it, River Rouge, and all that, where Ford Motor Company is. Well, every block was a different ethnic group of people, from blacks to Europeans and Orientals, because my mother worked for a Chinese cook at a Chinese restaurant right there by the house that we were renting. And she'd come home with chop suey, which, by the way, is an American dish, not a Chinese dish.
So, that's funny. I didn't even realize that she did that as a job.
Yeah,
but
she was a waitress, and
okay.
She had like 3 jobs, to try to make him. I had a stepfather, but I never, had several of them, but only one of them took interest in me. Anyways, so that's how I got to Detroit, and then I stayed there, and I went to school there. Academically, the principal was my mother's teacher at one time, and he called me in the office one day, and he says, "Love," he says, "academically you're not cutting the mustard, and he says, I'm going to put you in machine shop, and I'm put you in blueprinting. We make blueprints, and whatever you draw with the measurements on it, you have to make it, and we were making gears and things of this sort, and I really fell in love with that, and I basically excelled in doing things with my hands. I didn't realize it. And then my mother bought me an X-Acto knife for carving wood, and I'd get a block of balsa wood, and believe it or not, at that time I made a fireplace, outdoor fireplace barbecue, and where that came from, nobody did it. That where it came from, I don't know. It just I made it, and I mean it was curved and pretty, and it had a grill and all that on it, and so that's when I started realizing too that I needed things with my hands, and not the academic part of it. But then when my mother us kids would go around and collect. World War II was going on, and we tried to join the Army, but the recruiters knew us.
But you were how old when you were trying to join the
15.
military? At 15. So World War II was going on when you were 15 years old.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact did that have, like, just on your family life, though, with the war going on? And
well, everything was rationed. A lot of things, gasoline, coffee, everything. And we had to scrounge, and find food. And the big thing our families were, the first thing they started teaching us, besides how to talk and numbers, we had to learn how to count cash and how to break, a dollar bill, because we never saw a $5 bill.
Yeah, so it was a dollar bill.
But a dollar bill, how to make change, and and I was only like 9 years old, 10 years old when we started learning how to, count money. And because the first job I got was selling Detroit Free Press, at 12 years of age in front of a bar at midnight, on Outer Drive and Jefferson Avenue, which is the two main streets going through our community. And so it was, it was one of those things that everybody did it, and we thought that was normal, reasonable,
right,
and
so
acceptable.
Different than today. I mean, 12 years old, you're selling newspapers at midnight in front of a bar.
Yeah, and then the newspaper man, newspapers were only a couple pennies at the time, so you didn't make much money. But then again, when you sell about 20 or 30 newspapers out in front of a bar to people coming out, some of them are drunk, and they give you 50 cents, and you got to give them, 43 cents or 48 cents back or something. And anyways, and so it was an experience to me. But the guy would come around, that was the boss, so to speak, and pick up what newspapers we had and count how many papers he had given me and how many I sold. And then he'd give me, maybe 50 cents, something like that. And then I'd go home and give it to my mother. My sisters would do the same thing. They were, working in a store, or one was going to become a nurse, and whatever money they made, they'd give it to my mother, and then she would, buy food and whatever else to help her out and the family. So that's how we survived in those years of World War II. Even though things were rationed, we never did without. We were able to have a lot of food. The food was wholesome, even though she made us take castor oil, for example, and she knew that we needed something to keep us healthy, because the foods we had you couldn't have a refrigerator. They had ice boxes in those days, and they charged 25 cents for a 25-pound block of ice, and turn around and put that in the ice box.
Yeah.
And I still use that term today. Instead of a refrigerator, I call it the ice box.
The ice box, yeah.
So by doing that, I give away my age, I guess. But we played, as kids, we played baseball, football. Hockey was the big thing. We had a creek where it froze over during the winter, and we shoveled off the snow, and we'd play hockey with broomsticks and things like this, and had a great time, playing it. Detroit Red Wings was our local team, and we supported them, and we just loved hockey, and we all did it.
What's funny, Dad, is I didn't realize how much you loved hockey until I found that hockey stick in your storage room that the West Point, 1972 West Point team all autographed for you.
Yeah.
So it's just funny how I know it just kind of sat in the corner, but you're
Yeah,
so
I was
humble.
surprised because I'd watched the cadets when I was the sergeant major at West Point, and I'd watched the cadets play, whatever team they were going to play
Right.
that day or that week, and so it was a fun thing.
Yeah.
And that's at West Point, of course, is another episode of my life later
Well,
on.
we'll get into that in a little bit, but it just made me think about how it was funny how I didn't realize that hockey was such a sport that you
Yeah.
loved that much. But
I was never a team player in a sense. I mean, I played it and I enjoyed it, but to me, my goal was I had to do something. I had to compete against myself, because the hardest person in the world to to become is you got to beat. You have to beat yourself to whatever you're playing. And that was a challenge for me. It's a fear. If I had a fear, like when I went in the Army and I was, had height problem, I looked at it and I said, well, how do I conquer that? And that's when I went into parachuting, And then when they had free fall and skydiving, and then I had to get into that, because it was a challenge, and it's a fear I had, and I had to overcome it.
So you always challenge yourself, yeah.
Yeah. So that was the way I grew up, knowing that everything became a challenge, and everything I had to do was I had to fight those fears. It's like going to school, and bullying, for example. In those days you stood up and fought. Right after school was over, you went out and had knuckle drill. And it was to me it was great. I was a little bit bigger than some of the others for my age, but you look at me today and it's not the case. I think I'm shrinking. I'm losing. My bones are crushing together or something. The cartilages are all gone. But anyways, but that was the challenge for me in my life. And then when I hit 17, I turned around and joined the Army.
Well, let's back up for a second, though, because before that, so you were, as a teenager, like you were kind of running with some kids, right?
Well, we had.
I think that's an interesting story,
everybody
too.
had a gang.
Yeah.
And the gangs were, some gangs were friendly, some were, more organized than our gang, and we did some things that today, of course, I'm not proud of it, but we did it, and we had the scrap, how to break into a car and get the spare tire and the jack and all these other things, and it was amazing because we'd turn around and sell them to the junkyard and then make some money on it, and that was to us no more reasonable and acceptable. But but anyways, when I joined the Army, when I got assigned to Fort Knox, Kentucky, I received a newspaper clipping from one of my buddies, and he's still alive today along with me. He's the last of my gang, so to speak, and the last of everybody I knew in Ecorse, Michigan. And he sent me a clipping, local gang caught, and I thought I said, whoa. And I keep thinking somebody upstairs is watching over me,
Well, that's true, because you have so many stories where, you definitely do, Dad, have someone looking over you, because the stories that we'll get into more here, but you have some amazing stories. So what was the actual decision, though, that made you decide? Because I know before, during the end of World War II, you were 15 and wanted to join. They told you to come back.
Yeah.
So what was your thought process around why you wanted to join the military?
Well, growing up, we never really talked about it as a family, but as kids all knew that it was our job to defend our country and protect it and serve our country. And when I was 17, I knew that when I left home, I was not to come back. That was given. Everybody was doing it, so it wasn't anything shameful or nothing like that. It was just that was the way it was. They can't keep supporting us, in manhood, so to speak, or towards manhood. You had to depend on yourself. So when I left home, I knew that I wasn't supposed to come back. But I also knew, too, that if I had a dire need, yes, I could. But I was told that I had to either sink or swim. When I got out, it was up to me to find a job and just learn as much as I could. And of course, with the highest grade I ever got in school was 6th grade. But then I found out too that I said, well, that was sort of a negative in my life. But when I joined the Army, and then I found out that all the sergeants and NCOs, even some of the officers, they all had 6th grade education. That was most people had. When you got to 6th grade, you had to go to work. So nobody, the men particularly, the boys, they all had to get a job, and that was the highest education they got compared to what it is today.
Yeah, very different. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of it's different and it's greater, but it was just something that I knew I had to sink or swim, and I decided to swim, and that was try to find a job, and I swept the floor at a steel mill, and the broom was bigger than I was, and things like that. But I did it, and I made a couple of dollars, and in those days that was a lot of money. And then I just give it to my mother, and then when I went in the Army, that was the first time I got 3 meals a day, and the military just fed me, and I wanted to be a cook, because I said I could eat, and I got it. I said, oh, so be careful what you wish for sometimes, because but then again it was based on your educational level too. They didn't know what to do with you, so they made a cook out of you. But
so where was it? So you joined the Army, became a cook. Where were you stationed?
I was stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I went to cook school there, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and cooked, the big meals. And in those days, a company size or a infantry, if you're in the infantry or any military unit, they have companies and then battalions, and or companies. They have squads, platoons, company tactics, battalion tactics, and division tactics. While I was a cook, that was the lowest element you can go become, basically, And I got a story later on about how I got out of being a cook, because I enjoyed it, but then I realized that one time there was no future, because when you go in the Army, what rank can grow faster than another rank or another job, particularly. And you have to, whatever job you get, you find out it calls for the highest grade you can get as a sergeant, maybe. Well, that's not high enough. I want to become a first sergeant, and I want to become a master sergeant, a sergeant major. I wanted to grow. I didn't want to stay as a staff sergeant, for example, be a platoon sergeant in the infantry. And that's, I've known guys that were platoon sergeants with 20 years service. They didn't want anything else. All they wanted was just that one rank and then stay there for 20 years. And I felt that I wanted more.
So pretty early on, you joined, were a cook, but then you were already starting to look at where could I go, how could I do this, what do I need to do?
Well, after I became a cook, then I got assigned to overseas to the 17th Infantry Division, 7th Division, and at the time it was going to Korea. Okay, and this was in the end of '48, and then turn around and on the way over on the ship, we had a troop ship, and it took us 7 days to get across the ocean, and we got there, and then they said no, they're not going to send you to Korea because Korea at that time was having political problems, and the North Koreans and the South Koreans, and there was a pending war coming. So they changed their orders and sent us to Japan. And I got assigned to the Camp Shimofinnegan in northern Sendai, Japan, or northern Honshu, the main island of Japan. And then we were, I was a cook, and then being in the infantry, we had, we were on maneuvers, and the cooks, we had to make breakfast, dinner, and supper, and we went, after we made breakfast, we found a place to go swimming, a creek with a big hole in it, and we went swimming. We were having so much fun, we forgot to make dinner or lunch, as they call it. And so they decided that, well, I'm going to punish you. The commander, of course, they were all upset because they had, somebody had to go in there and make sandwiches real quick to feed the troops or the company. And the company commander says, you're going to go, we're going to take all the cooks and make an infantry squad out of you. And tomorrow we're having squad tactics, fire and maneuver, where one squad will fire ammunition up a hill, and then another squad will advance 10, 20 yards maybe, and then they'll lay down and set a field of fire, and then the other squad will get up and charge and go another. So it was like a leapfrog system to take a hill, for example. And the trouble was that we broke the record as far as score for the best squad there.
That's funny. So as a cook, you guys missed the meal, so they made you.
Yeah,
your
so
punishment was to go fight. They put you in training, and you scored the
so
best.
we beat the guys that were trained.
That's hilarious.
And we weren't trained in squad tactics, but that was the beginning of my, and I just stayed there. I said, I don't want to be a cook anymore. And then I found out too, I made, first of all, when you went in the Army, you were a recruit. Now they don't have that rank anymore. You became a recruit. Then you got promoted to private. So you thought, you think you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Well, I was below the bottom of the
below that as a recruit.
As a recruit. But then I made private, and then I made PFC, private first class, and then I made corporal in the infantry, and all this was going on, in Japan. And in Japan, I spent about a year and a half there in learning infantry tactics and all that. And then when the Korean War broke out, and then a half our unit they took half our personnel and sent it down to the southern Japan to a 25th Division because they were under strength, and then they sent them over to Korea during the beginning of the war in 1950. And then in 51, in the end of 50, they said, well, what are we going to do with, they can't send us over because we're not up to strength at the number of people we were supposed to have to fight the war. So they brought we went up to Mount Fuji, the high mountain, to a volcano in southern Japan, and had advanced combat training. And then we had to go to Yokohama to pick up people, Chinese army people, to fight with us. And it was called KATUSA. It's an acronym for Korean Augmentation U.S. Army. And they became our foxhole buddy, so to speak, each one of us. But when we picked them up, and they were coming off the boat, and we thought they would see guys in a uniform, and come to find out they were in shorts and T-shirts, and they had like a red scarf, and all their personal belongings were in that. And I says, they look like hobos that we used to have during the old days when people were riding trains looking for transportation to get across the country, and hobos would set up camps. And you see a picture of a guy with a stick and a rolled up big handkerchief with his personal belongings.
Oh yeah, like
it.
the old. Yep.
Yeah, that was it. And I thought that was what they looked like, and they had no training whatsoever, and we weren't quite trained ourselves in a sense, But so they became our foxhole buddies, and it was, you can never depend on them because when you're in combat and 50% alert every night, and you're in a foxhole with two guys in a foxhole, that's a 6-foot hole where you can, build it up and sit there and fire your weapon, put a dirt and sandbags in front of your position so you can fire. But they would go to sleep, and and the next thing you know, company commanders coming over, kicking you in the helmet, kicking you in the head, saying, "What are you guys sleeping for?" One guy's supposed to be awake. Well, and they wanted to punish me and say, "Well, we got to make an example of something." And I said, "Well, he says, well, he says, we're going to make you a private again." So I got busted. My first time I got busted.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, it wasn't my fault, because I did my shift, and then he was supposed to do his, and he slept. But, nobody spoke Korean. I couldn't speak Korean, and the interpreter wasn't around. So it was, my word against his. And so anyways, but then I made corporal back, a couple of days later.
Oh, so they just took it away for a couple of days.
He says, well, because I complained. I said, wait a minute, something's not right. And the CO was a real nice guy, the company commander. And so he said, put your stripes back on, so I pinned them on. So anyways, but then that's how I got into the Korean War, and made the landing, in Incheon landing in September of 1952. No, the 1950, and then stayed with that and stayed with that, and then when the war ended.
Yeah, but that was quite the experience when you did that landing, right? And how you guys had to escape. I mean,
well, we had
to
unload off the ships with big rope ladders on the side of the ship, and then lower ourselves down into LST's landing craft, that opened up in the front and made it to the beach, and then we'd walk through the water and get on the beach, but it was unopposed. It wasn't, the North Koreans weren't there. Because they were the 23rd and 25th divisions had already pushed them back a little bit, so away from Busan. So it was an uneventful landing. Even the news media made it a big deal. But then we went ahead and started fighting the North Koreans, and we went up to Seoul, Korea, which is the capital of Korea. And when we got there, we had a city, house-to-house fighting, so to speak, in a big city, apartments, town, and buildings, business buildings, and had to do that kind of thing. So we liberated Seoul, and then General MacArthur, the commander of all operations in Europe, said, "Okay, you're going to try another tactic," and we loaded my unit onto ships, and we went on up to North Korea, and landed up in a town called Iwon, and then we went from there to the Yellow River, and we had small fights with the North Koreans at that time that we ran into, but we made it to the North Korea, which is to the border, which at that side was Manchuria, and then the other part where the Marines were at Chosin Reservoir, that was China, the land of China. And unbeknownst to us, they were building, the Chinese who got into the war were coming into the war, and we didn't know that at the time. And so we were, doing security fight. We had small skirmishes with North Koreans. They were testing our strengths and our positions and everything else. And also we had to be on alert 24/7. But it was sort of a tough time. And then
because there was a lot of men lost in that when the Chinese got involved, right?
When Chinese hit us, they hit the Marines first, and
So
they were 5 kilometers south of the Chinese border, and they hit them first, and they got the majority of them were hit there first. Then they hit us because there was a little mountain range between where the Marines were, and we tied in with them, and then we were on the other side of the hill, so to speak, and then we got hit, and then that was on the day after Thanksgiving in 1950, and so from there we realized that we weren't strong enough because the enemy Chinese had come in there, and they were, a couple of divisions, which is a lot more than what we had on in the American side. We only had a Second Infantry Division was there, a battalion, an our battalion, and then another battalion, and you're dealing with company or regiments of troops, and so there wouldn't be enough ammunition for to depend on us, and we didn't have helicopters in that days, that kind of support like they have today, and everything was shipped to you by, shipped on the coast, and then trucks to your position or jeeps, and so they decided that it would be time for us to get out of there while we could. So we had.
And I know you don't like to call it retreat. What did you call it?
We call it a retrograde movement to the rear.
Yeah, retrograde movement to the rear. I love that. There's never a retreat.
Never,
right?
never. General Barr was the commander of the operation there in the military for the Army, and he said, "No, we're not retreating." And then anything that floated, we went back had a march back to a town called Hamnung, and which anything that floated, we got onto it, and I was hoping to get on a ship, but I wound up on an LST. And the reason I wanted to get on a ship is because they feed you, And then I wound up getting on an LST, a landing craft, and went from North Korea all the way down to the southern tip of Korea, to South Korea, and to a town called Busan, and started the war all over again. And then we liberated Seoul the second time, and then turned around and another town, the major town was Daegu. We liberated that, and then we fought our way up to what is now the 38 parallel, and that was where I got rotated back to the States. I was one of the one of the youngest guys there, but yet I was a senior as far as the time I was with the unit. I was the oldest person in the company.
Wow.
And I was only 17, 18, and so a lot of we lost a lot of guys, and that's probably the terrible part about war. You lose a lot of friends and people.
Well, and especially to experience a lot of that. I mean, you're 17, 18. You're a teenager,
Yeah.
right? And you're having to deal with those kind of issues.
Yeah.
And I know you had one story about how your backpack and everything was
all
shot up.
Yeah, when we were in Korea, everybody, it seemed like the big thing was, well, first of all, you don't have that today in the wars they have today, but we had a front line and the enemy line, and in between was no man's zone, and what we did is, in the nighttime, we sent patrols out to look at where the enemy was, where their positions were, where their machine guns were located, and the only way to do that was you sort of had to get exposed, so they could shoot at you. And I said, to me, that's the dumbest thing ever going on. I was just, I'm going to have to expose myself so I can find out where the machine gun is. Hey, come on, let's get real. So I was never a fan of that, but yet, being in the military, you do what you're told, and I just went, and then I was sat there. We were going, and the sergeant in charge decided to go. We were in the edge of a tree line, and he decided to go out, expose ourselves a little bit, and then I heard a shot go right by my ear, and then I heard a grunt behind me. A guy got hit, and was killed, and all he could say was, "Ugh," and then he was dying.
Sad.
But the bullet went right by my ear, and I could hear the crack of the bullet when it went by.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, "Boy, we hit the dirt," and that ended that recon that night, and we had to carry the body back, and then we had some other guys that were shot too, and we returned fire, and then, but it's dark, you can't see, you can see the flashes, so you aim for the flash and hope that you can hit something, and that was just the way it was. And we got back to Hamnung, and like I say, started the war all over.
But after that though, you
Oh,
were taking
yeah.
your backpack and stuff off.
Oh yeah.
Your
And
binoculars.
then when we got back to Busan and started the war again, well, then we were taking hills, one hill after another, you know, because the enemy wants to be on top of the hill, and we wanted to be on top of that hill because he had better firing advantages. And I got pinned down by his machine gun fire, and I was laying there on the ground waiting, you know, and sitting there and hoping the bullets were going by us. And I had a backpack on with my rations and some clothes and whatever you carry in your little backpack. And I didn't realize it, but when the other team, the whistle blew, and you jump up and it's your turn to, you know, to run up the hill a little bit and get ahead, so, and then lay down the field of fire when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I noticed my backpack, I was losing all my equipment. You know, one of the guys said, "Hey, your backpack's all shut up." You know, and I realized I never felt it all the time that, you know, I was laying there, and of course it seemed like for an hour or so, but it was only a matter of a couple of minutes, you know, a short period of time. And then I realized, I said, "Oh my God, somebody upstairs is watching over me
Again.
And I said, you know, and I just think that it was, you know, why, you know, and that's one of the things in war, you always ask, why not me? Because I never got wounded. I had a little shrapnel here and there, but everybody had that, you know. But so we never bothered, you know, reporting it. We just pick it out, whatever, and put a Band-Aid on it if we had one, or handkerchief, or they'll tear up a T-shirt and make a bandage, you know. But that was an experience for me, you know. And I realized that, wow, they're serious.
Yeah, they're serious. Yeah.
So I became serious, and I said, well, it was an education in itself, the war itself, and then having the fire back, and we had one time we had to go up and reinforce a Dutch company. In the Korean War had other countries that also participated in the Korean War to support us.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's amazing. If you go to the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C., you'll see a row of cement blocks with a plaque on it for each country that supported the United States. And it's impressive because everybody thought it was just us fighting, just Americans, when in fact there was other countries there with us. So we went up to help the Netherlands, the Dutch company, and the Dutch commander was killed there. And our positions, you know, when you got rice paddies and little berms of dirt in front of you, you're laying in a rice paddy, you know, up to your neck in water and trying to hope the enemy doesn't attack.
Oh my gosh.
And then the enemy does attack, and they're banging on pots and pans and hollering, screaming, and it's all a psychological thing to get you upset. And you know, you listen to it because you know eventually they're going to come at you. And then they started firing at us, and so of course they didn't realize that we were there to support the Dutch, and they didn't realize that, you know, there was more people than they thought. And so we were able to put down the the shooting and advance forward, and then help the Dutch out because they just lost their commander. And so it was wars like that. And then we kept doing it. We just stayed there, and then you know, and moved up, you know, maybe 5 kilometers a day or something at a time, taking hills. And it was always one hill after another, you know, you had to take. And then it was just a period of time where when you're sitting there all by yourself, you know, or not by yourself, you're laying there, but it's quiet, and you got your little cover where you a tree in front of you or something like that for protection, and you realize that, you know, you become calloused, and you know, you want to just attack the enemy, you want to jump up, and I was about ready to do it. I was, you know, it's like a mental thing, you know, and you think you can just, you know, jump up and fight the war by yourself. But fortunately, the whistle blew, and the whole unit attacked.
Oh, gotcha.
It got up at the same time, so it was good timing. And so I didn't have to go up and try to fight the war by myself.
Good thing.
I says, well, again, somebody's upstairs watching over me. But then we got up to what's now the 38 parallel, which is still in effect today, where the difference between North Korea and South Korea.
Right.
And so that's when I got orders that I was I was a young guy, but I was the oldest veteran, so to speak, at that point in time. And I was the first one to be pulled back to the rotation back to the States. And then when we got on a ship back to Busan and came back, and then we landed in Seattle, and turned around and had a big parade for us. And there were like 20 guys on a Army 2.5 ton truck,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we drove us through the main part of Seattle, gave us the key to the city, you know, token type thing, and I don't know whatever happened to the key I had. But anyways, I don't have it anymore. But anyways, and so that night we were free to do what we wanted, because the next day we had to get on airplanes or trains, had a troop train. I had elected to take a troop train all the way across the states to get back to Detroit, you know, and I turn around and we all think, well, we better get something to drink. But it was Sunday, and everything was closed except for the taxi cab driver. We talked to him. I says, where can we get a drink? You know, and he says, well, there's a Philippine American Legion Hall. I said, we went there, and I tell you what, we went in there, and they were, everybody knew who we were, and we just come back from Korea, and we had a table full of whiskey glasses,
Mm-hmm.
everybody was buying drinks,
Oh.
and of course, when I woke up, one of the guys had carried me out of there, and I got on the train. I don't know how they carried me out of there, and I wound up losing my Chinese rifle I had.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah, because I had taken when I was in Vietnam, I captured a North Korean. It was just a fluke, And another little story or side story, but we had a foxhole. We were in position. We had taken the hill that night or that day, and so I was the BAR man at the time, a Browning automatic rifle, and I left it with one of the other guys there. I said, here, let me borrow your M1, and you can hold my BAR for me, and I'm going to go down the mountain back to our little company CP. And so as I was walking down this little pathway, and then all of a sudden I ran into a person squatting on the ground trying to load his rifle, and it was a North Korean and soldier, and I just hollered, I hollered ho, something, and he hollered something, and next thing you know, he was trying to put a round in his weapon, and he stopped, and I didn't bother. I didn't shoot him, because when I looked at him, he looked younger than me, and I was young, So I said, well, put your hands. I indicated, put your hands up, searched him. He had nothing on him, just a pair of black pajamas that they wore. Yeah, it was their uniform, the black padded uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took him back down to the company with me, to the company CP, and turned him over to the company commander there. And then I turned around. I said, I forgot what I came down for, so I'll just go back up. So I just dropped them off and walked away, and I don't know whatever happened to him, But I was surprised he was just a kid.
How young they were,
how young they were.
That's sad.
And then I look at the military, our military, and I thought, I had to wait till I was 17, and they're 15, something like that, or they can hold a weapon. That's old enough.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you do,
So
But-
back in Seattle, though, you got your partying,
Oh, I got
drunk,
partied,
and so you
and
lost that rifle that
I
you
got
had taken from
I,
him.
yeah, passed out, and I don't know how I got on the troop train. You know, buddies that were with me carried me, and we got on the troop train. I went all the way back to Chicago. So a buddy of mine had picked up a car, and I went from Detroit, or from Chicago to Detroit by car. Little did I know that my mother was waiting. They had a big parade, and those that flew back had a big parade in Detroit, and my mother and my sister were all looking for me, and I wasn't there, you know. And I said, oh well.
So you got there. When did you get there? A few days later, or
Yeah, a day later.
a day later?
A day later. So
Well,
anyways,
I'm sure they were just happy to see you, though.
yeah, oh yeah. And then you know, and it was, it was a nice homecoming. My mother and my sister and my aunt and uncles, all my aunts and uncles were there in Detroit, and they had a little get together, and that was, I thought really, made me feel good
Yeah, that's
to
nice.
get back. And then I realized it. But one thing I have to explain is during that period of time in the Korean War, when I went in, Roosevelt was president. And then when I was in Korea, first of all, I got my draft notice that I was supposed to.
While you were in Korea, you got a draft notice?
I got a draft notice. So, but anyways, and then
Still
then
inefficient.
we heard that President Roosevelt died, and then Truman became the president. And the first thing Truman did was, we're going to, people were, if you're due for a discharge, your 3 years were up, you have to have the Truman year. They put you in there for another year automatically. And I said, well, they ain't going to do that to me. I'm going to show them. I re-enlisted. And I re-enlisted for 6 years. And then I got $300, And today, when you look at these young men that go to SOAR and they re-enlist, they can walk away with $10,000
Right.
for re-enlisting for another 3 years. I said, times have changed.
Well, the value is different too.
The values, yeah.
I mean, you were selling newspapers when you were a kid for what, 5 cents?
Yeah, and I'd make a couple bucks. Well, my first paycheck, going back to going into the Army, was a $40. That was my first paycheck.
But you must have thought you had paid her with
Well,
that.
it was fantastic. In those days, each company they gave the company the money, and it was cash. And then they had usually the second lieutenant, platoon leader, with the card table, would sit there and count out. Okay, and you give Private Love reporting for pay, or Corporal Love reporting for pay, sir. And you put your hand out, and he puts cash in it, $40.
Wow.
And I said, but then you got a dollar for the Red Cross, $1 for the Old Soldiers Home, $1 for the company fund, whatever that was, and $1 for this. Then I said, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? So, you wind up with 35 maybe.
Yeah.
But again, that was a lot of money in those days too, and it was the most money I ever made, $35. And I said, God, this is great, Plus they gave me 3 meals a day.
Right.
3 meals and a flop, and a place to stay.
There you go.
So anyways.
So then you're back now.
So anyways, I was home on 30-day leave from Korea, and then I got assigned to actually Fort Riley, Kansas, to Psychological Warfare Center. And I was assigned to a second loudspeaker and leaflet company. And I said, what am I doing here? I had no clue what all that was, but it sounded exciting. But they were in the process of moving to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The Psychological Warfare Center changed its name to Special Warfare Center. And the next day I was at the parade ground. I saw some guys throwing themselves over their shoulder like judo, about 4 or 5 of them. And so I asked them what they're doing. And he said, well, we're a new organization called the 10th Special Forces Group. And I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, it's guerrilla warfare, and we're it's a new organization just starting. And I said, well, how do I get in? He says, see that warrant officer over there? He's a personnel officer. And the next morning I'm dragging my footlocker over across the parade ground, and then that's when I got into Special Forces.
One of the
And
original members.
so then I became an original
Wow.
member
Yep.
of the 10th Special Forces Group, and then I had to go to jump school because I wasn't. I was a, well, you know, if you're not a paratrooper, you're a leg, and I didn't want to be a leg anymore. So that's just a term they had. So non-jumpers are legs, but paratroopers are paratroopers. You know.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I went to jump school at Fort Benning. Then I came back to Fort Bragg, and then was assigned to Team 16. At that time, it was called FA Team, Field Assault Team, and then they changed the name to ODA, Operational Detachment A, you know, and then it was in Special Forces, and that I really enjoyed, and been spent 15 years with them, but part of that tour. I made sergeant, then made sergeant first class, and then also went over to Germany as an organization to battle to Germany, and that's when I met Brett and Debbie and Cheryl's mother, you know,
Yes.
and then I got married over there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had to, the baby we had was considered a blue baby.
Your first child,
Our first,
Patricia.
first child, Patricia Mary. I named her Patricia Marie, but the nuns at this Catholic hospital, Germans, changed it to Patricia Mary, and it was already signed, sealed, and delivered. So it's been Patricia Mary. But anyways, they sent you know the kid's mother back, you know, my wife, and back to Walter Reed Hospital with the baby, and then I had to put in for a compassionate transfer back to the States so I could be near them. And then I got assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, or Armored Infantry Division, at Fort Riley. No, take it back, at Washington D.C. and was the honor guard actually, and I got assigned to that, and it was an honor to be in the honor guard, but it wasn't my thing. I didn't like pomp and pageantry. I didn't want parades every damn Sunday. You know,
Right.
It was a bummer. Dressed up in khakis. Once you put your khaki uniform on, it was all pressed, starched. You didn't sit down, so you had, even the bus that took you over to the Pentagon, you know, you had to hang on to a bus loop like the old streetcar.
Yeah, and stand up.
And it was a whole different world. But anyways, I got was there, I mean, with the family, and unfortunately, Patricia passed away. And because I was in the honor guard, and also I was a career soldier, I had a sign for a plot at Arlington Cemetery. So I have a plot waiting for me. You know, I'm trying to hold off as long as I can to get there.
Yeah, well,
even
and
though I'll
yeah.
be buried next to Patricia Mary. You know. But,
Yeah, so she was 6 months old when she passed.
Yeah.
And I know that was really hard on you and Mom.
Yeah.
She was your firstborn.
Yeah.
And I did go back to see her gravesite years ago when I was in D.C. I made a point to go visit her gravesite, so that was surreal since I'd never met her.
It's a real thing there. And then I went back and the CEO of the 3rd Infantry there I asked for a transfer back to Special Forces, and he said, "No, I'm not going to. I need you here, you know." But my time was up, you know. I had time for an enlistment, and I said, "Well, I'm going to take a discharge, you know." So I took a discharge, and went up to Detroit. I stayed with my aunt and uncle over there, and Elsie was with me, and turned around and stayed there, and then I turned and back, and I went to the recruiting station and re-enlisted
I did not know this, Dad.
And when you get discharged, you have 30 days, and you can come back with the rank you held.
Oh, okay.
So I took advantage of that, and I came back, you know, as a sergeant first class. When I left, I was a sergeant first class, so I didn't lose anything other than just 30 days. I got to, stay on another leave, and then I got finally I got assigned to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and while I was there, they took advantage of me and had me chase prisoners. I had to go to Chicago, wear a weapon, go to the police station, pick up AWOL people.
Really?
And then I got one time I had to go to Detroit to pick up another one, and put them in handcuffs, handcuff them to me, and put them on the train overnight and handcuff them to the
So
radiator.
you're transporting prisoners.
Transporting prisoners. But
Okay.
I said, well, that was okay. It was
Yeah.
another experiment,
Right.
experience in my life.
Yeah.